Hello and welcome to the Comedian's Paradise. This is the podcast where we speak to mavericks across the comedy world. Now, today's guest has been in comedy for over a decade. He's a man who conquered the British comedy scene, and he's been through it all. He conquered Edinburgh. I believe you were the first Black British comedian to have
British.
conquered Edinburgh.
Correct. Well, conquered is a strong word. I wouldn't say I conquered it, but definitely opened a few doors in Edinburgh. That's
And
for sure.
you wrote your first. You wrote a sitcom that was famous around the UK. You went on Live at the Apollo. You've been from We Are Funny Project to being at the very top of the comedy world. And you have a fascinating to share to everyone. Please welcome the fantastic, the brilliant Dane Baptiste.
Thank you very much for having me, Marvin. Is that me making that sound?
No.
Oh, okay, cool. No. What's up? Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for that intro. I appreciate it very much.
Now, to anyone, this is a podcast that's got all sorts of listeners. I've got people from Taiwan coming in. I've got people from Ukraine, Kenya, Japan. I don't know. I had a big surge in Japanese listeners this month for some reason. I don't know why. But a lot from America as well. Most of my listeners are actually from America, but there are a lot of numbers down here. So for anyone that hasn't heard about your comedy journey, give us a short synopsis of like where you came from, where you are today.
Cool. So where I came from is I was born in Southeast London. I grew up in Southeast London as well. I, however, studied at Bradford University, which is in West Yorkshire, which is up north of the UK, which is a very white area. And some of my experiences there, I guess, began to plant the seeds about thinking about comedy. It's something I always enjoyed growing up. I saw Chris Rock when I was 15, performing Bigger and Blacker. And I think that was the kind of thing that cemented the desire to be involved in comedy. However, entertainment and comedy in the UK is very different to somewhere like the States, where the States had kind of a long recognized lineage of African-American performers. And being somebody who spent a lot of time in the States and is now also a resident of the US, so I have a green card. So spent a lot of time there. I was weaned and introduced at a very early age to the African-American contingent of comedy and comedy in general, because I guess that the modern version of stand-up we see today is kind of based on an American model. So I was largely influenced by that as well as like a lot of American sitcoms that came on in the UK. And also, I guess I didn't see anybody who looks like me that much on TV other than The Real McCoy. And that was a sketch show, and almost like the British equivalent of In Living Colour, where Black and Asian comics would have various different sketches talking about their respective experiences, and then that kind of disappeared. So I guess, for the latter part of my teenage years and early part of my 20s, I didn't really see anything that looked like myself. And then basically for me, I'd say my real origin story as becoming an aspiring comedian and creative in general was because I had no designs on trying to be famous, trying to be celebrity, trying to do comedy, because, like I said, it was something that seemed to be a very common pipe dream where I grew up, and everybody wanted to be famous and on TV. So I was like, I kind of had seen many biographical story about Black creatives who had aspirations about being creative and then been screwed over by industry or been misrepresented by industry. Because I grew up going to middle school and high school when it was like Michael Jackson was supposed to be the worst pedophile in the world. And the whole time the press was running with that, Jimmy Savile was alive and well, which I always felt quite interesting because, Elvis Presley was also dating Priscilla when she was 14, and I found it very strange. So the nature of the media and the industry wasn't really something that kind of enticed me. So I was, I guess, trying to settle into a life of regular work, and comedy and being funny was something I did as a hobby. And then I'd say, my origin story began sometime 2008. Well, the first gig I ever did was 2006. I performed at Kojo's Comedy Funhouse because basically I found myself out of my first serious relationship with lots of free time in the evenings. And then my friend signed me up for a night. So I gave it a go. And I guess navigating the comedy industry was something I wasn't aware of or understood. So did a few gigs, then stopped for many years. And then, 2008, when the credit crunch happened, I guess that kind of like was an epiphany for me where I was kind of like, oh, so even if you do work an honest job and pay into your pension and national insurance, at the end of your working life, you still might not even have a pension. So what the fuck is the point in all of this really? And that's for me, that's been, even now, the economic trajectory of the UK has been a focal point of my observations and work as a comedian for a very long time. I think that it's been a point of existential dread to think that we are basically, if you think of British society or Western civilization as an organism, then essentially the credit crunch and the subprime mortgage crisis was like a massive hemorrhage or a aneurysm that really has only been either stitched up or just taken medication for, but we are just hemorrhaging at a massive rate. And for me, it was kind of like, well, I guess it don't really matter, does it? So I just became so disillusioned with the world. I began to withdraw from caring about things like work and stuff, and then reading and having this process of unlearning and trying to find a new way to look at the world. And then because of the experiences I was having working within industry, I kind of realized then that this wasn't for me either. And 2010 is where I basically decided, do you know what? Let me just give this comedy thing a go, or just do something I've always wanted to do rather than saying I wanted to be a comedian. Let's give something I've always wanted to do a go. If it doesn't work out, I guess I'll get a regular job. But the normal reasoning or logic people have where it's like, it'd be nice to pursue something creative, but I've got bills to pay, mouths to feed, overheads, realizing that basically that entire economic system is over. I was just like, forget it. And, since then, I just throw caution to the wind and thought, just give it a try, because the world in which you have grown up in is over. And I don't know. I think there's sometimes this element of nihilism that comedians have anyway, and and cynicism. And I think that all confirmed it for me. And so I began my comedy journey in earnest about 2010. And the rest is the present.
Okay. Now, with the comedy journey itself, am I right in saying that you started at We Are Funny project? So I remember Alfie Noakes used to mention you quite a lot at gigs, and then
I don't think I started there, but I think for me, I've had a very different experience to most comedians in that when I started doing comedy, I did a lot of comedy competitions, which went pretty well. I was in the final of for the Leicester Square competition. I was in the final for Leicester New Acts competition, in the final for the Max Turner Prize, and in the final for Amuse Moose, to name the ones that I can remember. I didn't do the final of So You Think You're Funny because Julia Chamberlain, who was the person who ran that particular competition, said, Dane, you're already doing jonglers, so you don't need to do this competition because the prize is kind of to get professional performance opportunities. So just on I guess on a meritocratic basis, like I had got a lot of push, and then working with like Alfie with the We Are Funny project, I used to just gig there quite often when he offered me performances. And I guess because I was consistently a good performer, despite being at like nearer to an open mic level, I worked with Alfie quite a bit, and he wanted support for the We Are Funny project, and I was prepared to support that vocally. And I guess maybe, can't remember if I did it financially at the time, or maybe put some money towards the Bill Murray. But I just found that despite all of this, I didn't really have any interest in from agency at large. So I guess one of the early points of validation when you are a comedian is that you get an agent that you sign with, and they'll do the work for securing your gigs on their behalf. And some people have agents or managers. And at the time, there were established agencies within the comedy industry, but none of them showed any interest in me or my narrative and what I wanted to do. And so, some of them going so far as to say, I guess, and this is across the board, is that, British comedy the workforce is largely predominantly white, largely middle class. And in the same way that society behaved, people didn't feel like Black British stories were nuanced and worth listening to. They felt like there was a very homogenous narrative when it came to Black British people and their journey, and there was not nuance shown for gender, for country of origin, for age, for sexual orientation, for ideology. It was just that Black people talk about being Black and that's it, and we don't have to listen to anything else. And that was something that not only was I not prepared to accept, I was not prepared to work with anybody who also reinforced that idea. So I was approached by a producer whose father ran a comedy club, and I used to perform at that comedy club quite often. So that was up the creek in Greenwich, way before they had the blackout, and they used to have a competition called One to Watch. And even then, we would get to the final of that competition and wasn't able to get through. And in the end, because I'd gone to the final so often, they were like, well, we'll just give you a 10 tryout spot on a Friday and see how that goes. And it basically went so well that I would be basically regularly doing that slot for about 18 months and also covering the opening 20 minutes in case one of the opening acts weren't able to make it or didn't turn up. And I had the same experience where there was another street performer who was running a club in Covent Garden and wanted to get more acts in. And so I remember doing there myself, and that was one of the early places that I was doing 20s when a lot of my peers were probably still doing 10s or not doing 20s professionally. And that was a top secret comedy club. That's a much bigger comedy club today, but back then it was a small club on King Street that was in the basement, and it was me and maybe a select few of comics, maybe not more than 10 or 11 would perform there as well. And then in the end, I approached the producers in Greenwich with an offer I'd gotten, and her reply was that she's left her job to manage me full time if I'm interested, because I had said to her that she could do it on an ad hoc basis. And then she said, well, I can see that you want to make some changes to this industry. And I was like, yep, I don't like how this landscape basically appears and shapes for Black British comics and everyone in between that. And that's something I want to change. And today that is the UTC, Up the Creek management agency. So I was the first actor on that agency, or co-founder of that comedy agency. And it just came about, I guess, because, I had to find a way to succeed in an industry that was working very hard to suppress a voice like my own.
Yeah, and what would you say are it's things have changed a lot now. I mean, up the UTC, a massive agency now. They're doing all sorts of wonders for a lot of acts, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, they had to, I guess, learning from the mistakes that I'd made, whether it's, well, I won't say the mistakes that I made, but today, obviously, they are seen as a very much powerhouse for Black British talent and for talent in general. But I was there at the beginning where it was just a husband and wife and just me. And it meant that, you had very little chance for mistake and failure, because not only was I representing this new agency, but basically representing Black British comedy in general, because, there's a lot of repeated phrases that I use within the industry, whether it's either one in, one out, or glass ceiling, or only one at a time, or you only get one chance. But all of these things factored into my journey, whereby, because it's a new agency, because the emphasis was on promoting and placing Black British comedy and talent at the same level as comedy in general, the pressure was that you had to kind of succeed. So it wasn't enough for me to go to Edinburgh and had a good run. I had to get a nomination for Best Newcomer for a debut show and then be the first Black British person to be nominated. It wasn't enough to get like a commission for a pilot for the BBC. I probably had to get a commission for BBC Three to not only get the pilot commission, but to also get a series off the back of that. And for that to be the first series written by a Black British writer to appear on the BBC's channels in over 20 years at the time. So had to do that, had to be on the first Black British people to do a national comedy tour. And then doing all of this, this is not just about the diversity aspect, Marvin, it's also the aspect of representation. Because it's one thing to be an act for a particular community, but if that community doesn't find your work or who you are to be genuine, then you will not be considered a representative, because it's not like there weren't Black comics that performed on the circuit before me, but there were some Black comedians who could not perform in a room full of Black people because their material did not resonate with them or was not considered accurate. And there's a lot of comics who were very talented on the Black circuit who may have felt like they couldn't perform in a room full of white people because they felt like their references and the points of their comedy was too specific, and they would have to be doing so to a audience whose only experience of Blackness is if a Black person is playing for their local football team or they see them in a music video. So it was doing all of this at a time where the outlook of the diaspora in the UK was still very limited, and and this is before social media allowed you to have video content online. So now I think social media has definitely helped the world to become smaller and for people to be able to circumvent gatekeepers and to showcase themselves, and for a lot of comics from diverse backgrounds to prove themselves to be undeniable to industry at large. Whereas, 10 years ago, there wasn't Instagram. You couldn't put videos up online. To transition into being a successful comedian, you would have to go to Edinburgh. And then that was expensive in itself. And me coming from an agent where it's only a husband and wife, most people know how much it cost to do a paid show at Edinburgh. They didn't have that money. Or if they did, they didn't give it to me. So not a motherfucking penny. Nothing. Like most comics will tell you, like when they go to Edinburgh, sometimes they'll go to their agent might give them some capital towards booking, and then they have to recoup those wins or losses by the success that they get off the back of Edinburgh. Okay. And my agent did not give me any money. So what I would have to do instead is that there'd be some weekends where I would start in somewhere like North London, Turnpike Lane, and do a private party. Then I'd pass on to another comedy club, then another one. Then I'd have to do like a spot at the comedy store, then go on to do a corporate show and finish. Wow. So there'd be like 7 shows a night. And not just like we're in New York where people can kind of do a couple early and late shows in the same area. Like I'm transversing the top to the bottom of London in order to make money to put on an Edinburgh show to hopefully change my trajectory of my career. So yeah, all going on, and a lot of work. In the same way that like when comedians normally perform at like festivals and stuff, they might arrange for transport and they might communicate with like the festival managers and the rest of it. But I remember driving, comedians like Mo Gilligan and Tez Ilyas from home to Latitude because that money, or they didn't have cars back then. So I just had to kind of chip in and just lead everybody there.
Oh, yeah. What was the furthest you had to do in one day? Because I heard a story that Pat Monahan did 3 gigs in 3 different parts of the UK at one point at times. Mm. Did you have to do that as well? Like do 1 gig?
I think I've done that before. I've done a show at Latitude, and I've gone down to, I think I've driven to Colchester and then gone to Weston-super-Mare.
What? Okay, bloody hell.
I think I've done, well, it might have been in the same day, but I know I think I've done Suffolk to Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire maybe in the same day.
Wow. What was, so it's been quite a journey to get where you are. How did things change once you progressed at different levels? What was the situation like? And did you have any expectations when you went into different levels of comedy of what they'll be like?
To be honest with you, I didn't really have any expectations at the time. I think on reflection, I Yeah, I mean, definitely the way people behave towards you probably changes over time.
Oh,
And people, like to take ownership for a journey.
okay.
So, there's probably a lot of people who are like, I gave him his first start here and I gave him his first start there. And it's probably wildly inaccurate. But yeah, I think if anything, if I'm honest, the change is probably you find that a lot of people, uh, that a lot more stakeholders are involved in your career the higher you go. So
Okay.
that might initially include having a representative like an agent or a manager. Then it might become having directors or producers when you're doing Edinburgh shows or doing tour shows. Then if you are developing something maybe for broadcast media, whether you had the opportunity to be on radio or on TV, you might have writers that work with you and you might have other producers and production companies that work with you and stuff. I say all this, but in my particular case, again, Marvin, I never had any of this. So when I ended up having the opportunity to do a sitcom and the script editor was introduced, but script was not really edited in a way that I liked, not just because I am questioning this person's competence, but I was writing what turned out to be the first sitcom with a black cast on the BBC in 20 years. So if you've not had an entire generation's worth of writers who understand the black experience, they're not going to be able to contribute to a project like that.
Yeah.
So, the closest that they were able to do at the time was having a producer who'd worked on Lenny Henry's Rudy's Rare Records on Radio 4.
Okay.
And I guess the rationale was, well, she worked on something with black people, so she'd be able to work on this show. And then, yeah, and then contributed nothing to the show and doesn't even work as a television executive anymore because, yeah, just weren't able to do the job. So I guess for me, like the real changes, I guess the stakeholders changed, but it's hard for me to say that exactly because, as I said, I had a manager that basically was covered a number of different roles, and I've never had a writer in my entire life. So where people were able to transition into like beginning to do the panel show circuit and doing shows like 8 out of 10 Cats and Mock the Week, normally they'll have a writer, and you get prolific writers like Henry Packer, Phil Kerr, Gary Delaney does a lot of writing for people. Jeff Norcott has done a lot of writing. And I'm sure there's others. And I'm aware that I've not mentioned any women. Granny Maguire is also someone I know who is an excellent BBC, has worked for BBC very often. Just that nobody sprang to get these people for me. So again, it's like when I made a transition into television and started to do stuff, I would notice that other people may have writers, but this wasn't something that I ever had. So as well as having to hone my stand up, then I had to learn how to write for television and how to uh, select some material that I could use for TV, material that I needed to keep, new material I had to create for television. And obviously there's the additional part of making jokes off the cuff. But, I guess I learned that a lot of comics that today are relatively prolific would have writers and people were employed around them to help them with their voice. It's just not something I ever had because in those early days, when you say like, as big as the UTC was now, I guess they weren't that big back then or just weren't interested in spending the money or they didn't need to spend the money. But in terms of like me having a writer, that's something that never happened in like 8 or 9 years.
Yeah. How did it feel, just when you did start to get the opportunities that you had to work so hard? Like because you said you basically a self-made man, but how did it feel when you started getting the opportunities that you got without any support? How did that feel?
Um, I mean, it feels validating, and I guess, and to be fair, the industrial side of it, I can definitely say I didn't do it all by myself. There were definitely people that saw my potential and prepared to work and help with me, and that's always good because it's nice to have that collaborative effort where people are working with you on the basis of something you can do, and you can work together to create something great. So that's always quite good, and I think that's one of the perks of an industry is that when you're working with other like-minded artists or creatives, then being part of a collaborative process to create something greater than
Yeah.
yourself is a great feeling. But I'd say that in terms of how it getting there, it felt good. But to be honest, and it might just be me, it might just been the fact that a certain level of self-awareness, and that's part of the complex of becoming a comedian is you don't feel any different. So it's not going to be reflected in any way where you're acting different. Like I was aware enough of my journey that just didn't really feel it needed to change me. It's not something I needed to lord over other people or other comedians, or something I needed to gatekeep from other comedians, because as I mentioned before, even though, you know, a lot of the talk from other comics and other stakeholders is that, oh, Dane's just successful because he's black and this is just an exercise in tokenism. And for a large contingent of the white comedy community and just white entertainment in general, well, how can I put this? Basically, what I've learned, and there might be another question you ask now, but yeah, I just learned that there's a lot of people who, in their heads, a large part of their foray into the creative industry is based on their ego. And so when they see people more successful than them, it can't really compute in their head that you may have worked just as well or have been able to exploit your opportunities better than them, or just, you're just as good. And so that's a difficult thing to kind of deal with, but you just have to kind of find a way around it. But in terms of letting it affect you, and and also critique is something that comes with profile anyway. So that was something I could deal with. And I guess it's really a question of not what was said, who's really saying it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm not sure if I answered
No,
that question correctly, to be honest with you, Marv. So, yeah.
no, I agree with definitely the last bit as well. I mean, if there's,
Mm.
with someone of your profile, you must have tons of dodgy messages in your Instagram. I've had a few comedians on the podcast that are females, and they've told me that their Facebook profile is filled with filth, and they're nowhere near as big as you.
Yeah.
And like, if you're getting some sort of insult from someone that, I don't know, it does something really, is not someone that you respect, and they're insulting you with all sorts of things, why would it carry any weight towards you? I agree
Absolutely
with that.
none. And that's the thing, is that, and I think it's an important thing I need to remind comedians or artists in general, is that nobody enters into this industry to be on the peripheries, or they don't get into this industry to be agents, or no one says, I want to do comedy so that I can be a comedy producer. Most people crave being that center of attention, or being
Yeah.
at the nucleus of comedy and being a stand-up comedian. When it doesn't work out for them, people can then fortunately find something that's related to the practice, and maybe that's why they find their feet. But what you get is that you have a lot of people who are very resentful and very jealous of that success. And so what they do instead is that where they are lacking in talent, they try to reclaim power. So whether that's people that run comedy clubs, who could be very small-minded and feel that they want to impose their will upon the comedy industry. You've got critics in particular who feel that their contribution to comedy has any validity, and that they should have a say on what is considered good within a subjective art form, when really the truth is, a lot of the time, their failed comics themselves couldn't make it work, so that they got a laptop. Absolutely, they got a laptop and an axe to grind, and so they think they can direct how comedy goes. And as far as I'm concerned, many of these people are predominantly white and been to stage school, and so they leave stage school with this idea of superiority, or whatever kind of inflated ego they have, because they think that they're performers. And they're used to a certain culture within the whole drama school circuit and the drama school pipeline, where I imagine that, racist microaggressions, class-based condescending comments or disparaging remarks about people made about gender are acceptable. I didn't go to stage school, so I didn't play none of that shit. And so where, people might say they've had people make snide comments towards them or sardonic comments about their work, people might try to do that, but they normally do that from a burner account, or they say nothing, because my entire ethos is that while people in comedy take advantage of the fact that there's no human resources, I might talk to me the same way you talk to me outside of a comedy club. That's not loaded. That's just basically to say, in the same way that the way I'm speaking to you on a podcast is the same way I'd speak to you off of a podcast. The same level of professional respect that if you were saying, I run a podcast, Dane, but I also work as a barista, I expect to talk to you with the same respect and the same level of civility in your capacity as a barrister as I would as your capacity as a podcaster or a host or a comedian. I don't believe in this idea of occupational hierarchy where, because of my job title, I can speak to somebody. I wouldn't speak to a runner at a TV studio in a way that I would speak to them if we were sitting next to each other on a train. There are some people that feel like they can migrate some kind of occupational hierarchy, or because they have a certain job title, they can treat people a certain way. And I just never been of that belief. And I much rather people, if they're not able to speak to me with respect, don't speak to me at all.
No. And what you said there is what a lot of people think, but don't have the courage to say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I've had to learn slowly over time, Marvin. That as much as people like to think that entertainment and performance and creativity is an environment that is very distinct from typical vocation, there's not much differences. I find that the same landscape that I observed when I worked in offices and I worked in industry, that the service industry is largely full of people who want to do minimum effort for maximum output, and are still trying to recreate the same environment in high school, whereby they are reimagined as the cool people they wish they were back in high school.
Oh, yeah.
And the entertainment industry is no different. There's a lot of people who are perpetually adolescent. They see this as a way of escapism and to maintain their arrested development as people, and to be able to conduct themselves in a way that they would have been able to conduct themselves in high school. The sad truth is a lot of people that have become entertainers do so because there is a part of entertainers' psychological complex where inside, they don't feel like they're cool people, or don't feel like they were affable people when they were younger, or at some point in their life, or whatever trauma, the person they were, they didn't like who they were. And so they use comedy as a way, or any form of entertainment as a way to reimagine themselves as the person they wish they were back then, and then conduct themselves in a way that they think that the person that they've created should conduct themselves to people within this environment of arrested development. And I just don't have time for that shit.
Yeah.
I don't
No,
have time for people that were nerds in high school trying to be cool now, or people who weren't able to get men to fuck them or women to fuck them in school, to now objectify themselves and then beg for attention, and then to use that attention to think that they can condescend to people. As I said, I'll just rather people speak to me in these environments the same way they speak to me outside of these environments.
yeah.
And I understand that there's a level, and people might say that, there's a level of game playing that has to happen within the industry, and I'm aware of that as well because I used to work in sales and I used to work in media. But my success as a famous person or a celebrity is not more important to me than my state of mind and my human dignity.
Yeah.
Because you can't buy those, and you'll never be famous enough to negate those things. So, you know, comedy is something that is going to be finite in my life, whether I like it or not. And I don't have too much of an ego not to accept that. But I'm going to have to be Dane Baptiste for the rest of my life. So I want to be able to conduct it in a way where I'm still able to live with myself.
Hmm. I'm going to ask two questions on what you said there. What?
Yeah.
Yeah. What you said there was something that Robert Greene said. Do you know Robert Greene? Well, he wrote the book gets called Evil, 48 Laws of Power, and all those books. But he says that
Yeah.
sometimes when people are really successful, they get even more insecure than you would imagine. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I think sometimes when something happens to you, where people turn against you, it just takes the trash out the door. When something gets done to you, and people that you
Yeah.
thought your friends turn against you,
Mm-hmm.
it's terrible at the time. But the ones that turn against you, is that person's just taking the trash out the door, and it's a weight lifted off your
Absolutely.
shoulder, and it take
Absolutely.
what people not to waste your time on.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very good notion. And I think that's in the process of unlearning, or I guess I was trying to prepare myself mentally for comedy and the rest of it, I did look at a lot of self-help books and pop culture books, not just that I was seeking the meaning, but just to be aware of just like the zeitgeist of the time that I was coming into. So I did read the 48 Laws of Power, and I'm still quite a person that's very cynical about self-help books on the basis that, well, self-help, you buying a book when you're seeking a way to help yourself seems kind of contradictory, but there's always relevance to there. But I guess it's also that if these things are imperative to human development and evolution, then why are we selling them rather than teaching them at schools and including them in curricula? But anyway, I think that for me, I always understood that I was in a job, and always was trying to conduct myself as a professional. I think for a lot of people in comedy, they see it as a way to find fraternity or sorority and belonging, as I said. A large amount of open mic audiences are high functioning alcoholics, and I thank you. So that's not me judging them, but when you're performing in pubs in the middle of the week, from people are there and you've got audiences there from 6 or 7 o'clock, a lot of these people just go drinking every day after work, and that's fine. I'm not there to judge you, but a lot of comedy is a lot of collection of people that are considered misfits or consider themselves to be on the fringe of popular social groups, or people that are lonely. But also there's a lot of people that are struggling with individual identity and then trying to connect with people at large. And so, a lot of comedians who form cliques and friend groups, it's very clear that they weren't people that were popular there when they were growing up. And that's why they crave this idea of clique and crave this idea of having insular circles of friendship, because that's something that they could possess and lord over people that are similar to themselves who also feel like they grew up feeling excluded. So, which I find is really ironic, because it's like, for me, I don't really get the idea of being cliquey with people if it's like mimicking the behavior of people that excluded you. I believe only validates your mistreatment. If you are bullied growing up, or you're treated a certain way growing up because of your background, your heritage, ethnicity, and then you only get into a space to do the same thing, then all you're really affirming to yourself and the universe is how you were treated was okay. And I'm not like that. I feel like, I could very easily have taken the opportunities and power awarded to me as a, pioneer, as a Black person in this space, or as somebody that had a considerable amount of influence based on my successes, and and wielded that in a way that could have been manipulative, or in a way that it was negative to my peers and contemporaries. But just don't really understand. I just don't understand the logic behind that. Why would I experience assholes only to become one myself? Because then it just means that the assholes are okay. I would rather evolve to be someone that exists as the antithesis of the people that behaved a certain way to me. So, yeah, I never wanted to be that kind of person, and I just don't understand why people want to be that. But I mean, it's for me, to be honest with you. Like I said, going back to the analogy of high school, there are some people that need that because they peaked in high school and didn't really go on to do much else. Whereas people tend to think a lot more independently. And those people who I've experienced within comedy, who are on their own journey, trying to do their own thing, all seem to be quite nice and are always a pleasure to work with. And I hope I've answered the question again.
What you mentioned is you just mentioned a lot where a lot of the biggest BS in comedy is.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, Marv, there's a lot of BS, because the other truth I'll tell you is that comedy, as far as the British contingent is concerned, I can't really speak for America, because obviously it's a much more, there's a lot more of an aesthetic emphasis in America. Like, looks and appearances matter a lot more because of its connection to the film and TV industry. Comedy for Americans can be like a way of transitioning into film and into, the silver screen. Whereas in the UK, I think it's a bit more of an occupation where you could exclusively just be a stand-up comic and have a relatively decent living there, and that's a larger focus. You can do so in the States as well, but there are some people but how can I put this? Comedy in the UK a lot of the time was a space for British people that did not have the looks to transition into TV and film.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's a large amount of people in comedy who hold that very dear, that comedy almost provides a celebration of mediocrity, at least from an aesthetic. Because an easy way to put this is, you see what Ricky Gervais looks like, right?
Yeah, he's a sexy man. I should have said that.
He's a sexy man. If he was American and tried to be famous looking like that, that's not going to happen.
No.
Not in the same way in the UK, whereas there is more of an idea of how people can look as a comedian. And you could ask any Black comic that's come from the Black circuit, like, there was a much more bigger focus on appearance and presentation, whereas that's not the same pressure that your average white performer has, particularly in the UK. So, yeah.
So there's what you said there about comedians not necessarily being the hot stuff or like aesthetic thing. I don't know. I think that's that's a thing that I feel that's for comedians as a whole. But what you said in terms of
Yeah.
people boxing, people with certain races, I think, I think is they want to try and sell you, don't they? Sometimes in people, they don't, then
Yeah.
they think this is what's being fed into society is the best way for them to try and sell you as a product. They feel that's what they feel, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. But also it's because of how much. So you know the comedian Travis J.
I've definitely heard of the name, but I'm not too sure who it
Yeah.
is.
So Travis J is a comic I worked with for a very long time, probably about similar time. He is now just himself has a show, and one of the first of its kind that I've seen on Radio 4 called Rum Punch, based on the Caribbean Takeaway. But he's someone who also has a legacy in comedy as well, because his mother is Angela Marr, who's a very prolific, if not one of the most prolific, Black British women and comedians of her time, and also had her own show on Channel 4, massive influence on me. But he says something that I always like to quote, where he says that music introduces culture and comedy explains it. And
Oh,
the Black British voice is something that the UK has tried for a very long time to suppress. Um,
oh,
the way, in terms of the racial landscape of the US and the UK, it's very different, but the racism is still very overt. Now, in America, it's more like, what? Black people? Whereas in the UK, they go, what black people?
okay,
So it's been a long-standing effort made by British media to downplay the existence and then the influence of the Black British diaspora on popular and contemporary culture and historic culture as a whole in the UK. And that's down to, like, even when at times of like Black History Month, a lot of time there's this focus on African American civil rights activists and campaigners rather than referencing British ones. There is also the downplaying of Black British influence on music in the UK. So, for example, on my podcast, I had a interview with the artist Skin, who was in a group called Skunk Anansi.
okay,
And she explained to me that, like, one of the reasons why Britpop, which was a very popular genre of music in the late 90s or mid to late 90s, with groups like Supergrass and Blur and, you know, Pulp and stuff, was called Britpop because they didn't want to call it rock and roll, because then that would mean having to concede acknowledging an art form that begins with African Americans and largely influenced by Black people. In the same way that, you know, ska and all these other genres have origins in, you know, the Black community, but it's something that they've never wanted to admit in this country. And while things have changed with music in the UK, comedy has had quite a long way to go. And so, you know, one of the things that's been uh, one of the most effective ways of disseminating racial rhetoric and also reinforcing a certain mindset is using comedy, because ridicule is a very powerful tool. So with British people, one of the ways the idea of British superiority has been disseminated to British people is through comedy shows and through narratives whereby British people see the rest of the world as kind of laughable.
okay,
And it's kind of like, we don't take ourselves too seriously, but we remember that we're better than everybody else. And so what I mean by that is that we make jokes and we can talk about our empire and our royal family, and we can do that, just nobody else can. So when you begin to broach talking about your experience as a Black British person, or as a Black person having the British experience, you'll get a lot of pushback from that, because people don't think you deserve to have a voice where you opine on how British society works. Because, you know, for a lot of people, intents and purposes, you're not really not necessarily a part of it. You know, it's the same way that, like, you're an immigrant until you are, you know, winning the Olympic medal for the UK, or winning a World Cup for the UK, or winning a club competition and then when you make an error, you become Caribbean British or Afro Caribbean or Black British.
I I mean, for myself as a whole, being Britain, I'm not bothered what someone's from. If you're from here, you're British. I think anything else is just, it's where you're from. It's where you grow up.
Well, I mean, that's a lovely sentiment, Marvin, and I would be inclined to agree. But I think we both know that what's
Yeah,
happening right now is
yeah.
definitely not the case. And even people within comedy now are trying to find as many intricate, elaborate ways and sometimes very clunky ways of basically wanting to say, if you're not white, you're not British.
Well,
And we see that,
certain
yeah.
people, yes, but I don't believe that.
Yeah, but there's certain people, but the problem is that those people are being profiled and they're having their voices elevated within the British media space.
Uh,
And there's a lot of comedians that have been very helpful in doing that, in the same way that there's been a lot of comedians in America who have been instrumental in humanizing and elevating the status of more right-wing and fascist entities within America and helping them to be elected to the current government.
well, now this is going to be a bit of a silly question, but I've interviewed with the podcast itself a lot of comedians in different parts of the globe and different places. Like I interviewed Skulk, he's from South Africa, but he said one thing
Mm-hmm.
that was quite interesting. It's going to be a long bit, but he said when someone makes a joke about something, but if they make a joke about an area and it's an educated and they've taken the time to understand that, people don't get offended. Now, when you see on TV or someone makes a cheap joke about being from Black British, but they know that that's not true, but they say it to appease other people. What's your thoughts on that? Because I know that
When you say that, do you mean as in like when Black comics make references like that, or just anybody?
I'd say, well, I think if it's someone who's not from that culture, from a certain culture, and they start making ill-advised jokes that are clearly not taken to understand that culture, it's a form of disrespect. But I think
Mm-hmm.
what about when someone who is from a certain culture, yeah, is that a bit of like they're taking the easy way out to appease other people, right? And disrespecting like for a hacky
Yeah,
joke
I
for
see what you,
Asian guys, it's
I
a
see what you
dick
mean.
joke. It's the dick joke.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's yeah.
Well, I think that they are taking the easy way out, but then it's the way I think it's a reflection of life that there are some people who deal with their trauma by being the butt of the joke, and they feel like that maybe that cushions the impact of being subject to ridicule by a larger or more dominant culture. And I guess they feel like if I just make jokes and I go along with the jokes, then I'll have an easier time, or I'll be more accepted by these people that are making jokes at my expense.
Okay.
And yeah, but I think that some people go that way, but I think it's quite short-sighted because ultimately, if you allow these negative uh, remarks or these negative perceptions of you and your community to be validated, then while you might be in a space whereby you can use jokes or kind of deal with it, you are leaving more vulnerable parts of your community open to dealing with the same thing, and they might not have the tools or resources to either make jokes about it or to defend themselves. So it's really about, while you might be one person on stage, are your actions affecting much more people like you as a whole? Um, I think that some people, yeah, find the idea of challenging stereotypes to be a daunting task, and some people won't do that because it's an easier ride. While we can talk about the fact that we look at comedy as a way to um, change perceptions or challenge perceptions, as well as like increase people's awareness, or just like, and do all of this while also entertaining them at the same time. A lot of people don't see show business that way. They see it as a way for them to derive the perks of having fame and for them to make money.
Hmm.
So, some people will behave in that respect and they have no interest in altering perceptions in a way that is not going to benefit them directly. A lot of people, just want to do what it takes to make money and to maybe what they believe will secure them any more work. And That's fine if that's what they want to do. But I think myself personally, I think that is a cop out, and I think it is short sighted because ultimately, the more you contribute to your own dehumanization or your own ridicule, at some point, the people that are orchestrating this towards you they won't change. No one's ever like, oh, we can take the piss out of this person. So let's stop at some point. That's not human nature. The more that you instruct with your behavior, inform them with your behavior they're allowed to get away with, the more that they'll do. And in the end, it might get to a point that you can't necessarily handle the jokes that you're getting. And so, me personally, I just feel like I think a lot more about what do I want people to say about me when I'm no longer around? Or what do I want people to say about me when I'm shopping with my kids? You know, it's fun when you do like the small dick jokes or you want to take the position of for one be ridiculed as an Asian person, for example. But when your kid comes home from school and says, this is how people are talking about me, or you're out with your family and people say, hey, yeah, that's a small dick guy. Or, you know, somebody's attacked or they are harassed because people are like, oh, it's okay for me to do it because this guy said it. That's what you should do with Chinese guys, or you should do that with Taiwanese guys, or that's what you're allowed to do that to people from Thailand. Then it's just a matter of time before that cuts back to you.
Yeah, I don't know how I would honestly. It's easy to say that in a certain situation you'd react this or that or that, but I've had a couple of situations where I've had one thing that's a bit strange, and I think in America and in here is that when minority groups we're prejudiced against each other. Like in America and LA, what the hell's going on there with like you got Asian gangs, you got Mexican gangs, you got black gangs, you're all minority groups, man. Like try and help each other up. And then
Yeah.
in here occasionally, and there are some relatives of mine that are a little bit racist to other minority groups, and I've received a bit of that, and I just think that's all madness and crazy. But I think I'll just say, listen, what's going on here? We're both minority groups. What's going on? And if it's with a white person, how would you feel if you had my skin color and had that joke?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazy to see, but to be honest, it's not a difficult thing to understand. This is the thing that again, this is an uncomfortable truth that has featured a lot in my work, and it can sometimes make things difficult for me. But racism and xenophobia are part of the white identity. Whether people want to accept that or not is a fact. When people begin to assimilate into this society, one of the clear indicators they show is that they are prepared to show the same animosity towards other immigrants as they experience themselves. That's where that comes from, really. So, in the case of like a Asian diaspora, elements of the Caribbean, or continental African diaspora, these groups who've experienced discrimination themselves see it as part of their covenant with British society to be accepted, that they will display the same levels of racism and xenophobia and prejudice towards people that resemble them, because it's almost like this is the truest pledge of fealty I can show to the dominant power. So far as America, well, America is a fascist country that's been predicated on capitalism since its inception. And what that means, to keep brief, is that Black people built the country. The Black people provided the capital for America to provide employment and economic opportunities for every other minority within America. Now, doesn't mean that every other minority has had an easy life, but what's happened is the journey of those people have been weaponized against African Americans and Black Americans to be like, well, we've come here and we've been able to turn our lives around, so your lack of economic prosperity must be because of you. But what it also is about is the fact that people who also want to be part of this American dream do so in the same way that they see white Americans achieve that dream, through the exploitation of other minority groups for the act of indifference and impotence towards other minority groups for your own benefit. Because we're growing up, we're all trying to work and thrive within capitalism, which is a zero-sum game. So everyone conducts themselves in a way where they understand, for me to gain, others have to lose. And I'm prepared to see that happen to people, especially if they don't look like me. And what's happened over time with all of that is as we've continued to do that, rather than collectively assert our rights and collectively assert our access towards capital and resources, everyone has become progressively more poorer. So it's a very classic thing of being like, it's my cookie, it's my cookie, it's my cookie. And we've been fighting over this one cookie for so long, we've allowed for the rich oligarch to own all of the cookies. And now there's not enough to go around. So this is why I go back to say to you before, I recognized that this happened in 2008. And then the whole veil came down, whereby it was like, your struggles economically are by design. And there are several buffers and levels within this economic hierarchy that's also predicated on race that maintain that structure. And people are prepared to fall in line, especially based on where it benefits them. So everybody's okay with black oppression because it's rather them than me. And I might be doing great, but at least I'm not. So everyone has this sad inferiority, superiority complex where I'm like, I can't be like these rich white men, but at least I'm not like these black guys. And then everybody kind of builds on that aspect. And as we've been doing that, resources have continued to be exploited. And now we're at the point now where no one's going to have shit. Which is why I say to you, in 2008, the reason why I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to do comedy and give it a go is because the basis for most people's, vocational or professional behavior, the reason why people get jobs and shit is to make money and take care of their families. We're at the point now, Marvin, that's not going to fucking work. You lot can work all you want. You can suppress, you can ignore asylum seekers. You're not going to get a house. You can blame foreigners. You're not going to have a pension. You can hate black people. You're not going to have a health service. And now the world is slowly coming to that realization. And this is why they say that fascism and capitalism in decay. So when I did my second show in Edinburgh, or my third show in Edinburgh, describing a post-subprime mortgage crisis Western civilization, as our pockets become lighter, so does the shade of our enemies. Because in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, anti-black hatred was, a given, to the point where that's why so many black people can make so many jokes about racism, because it's so ubiquitous, it becomes part of your environmental and atmospheric experience that when we was growing up, me and my friends, then we sit down and be like, everything's so racist. And we're so used to it, we would just make jokes about it. And one of the easiest observations to make about white people is how racist they are. Because even if you're not dealing with racist white people, I'm sure you're familiar with the term 6 degrees of separation. Well, with white people, you have 6 degrees of segregation.
Oh.
You have 6 degrees of segregation. And what that means is that even if you're not dealing with a racist white person, they're going to have a racist parent or racist relative or racist grandparent. And I know they are, because when I started comedy, every other white comedian had a joke about a racist member of their family. And they didn't say it in a way where they was ashamed of it. It was more like, I'm okay, but my grandma can be a little bit racist. And everyone would go, ha, 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 as if it was acceptable. And this is what I mean about how comedy can be used to legitimize certain mindsets, is that everybody would be like, well, my family's racist against this person. It's funny in that respect. And everyone's funny about that. And I guess my comedy is informed by being like, this racism exists, but it's not necessarily funny. Like, don't get me, your nan's a bit racist, but ho hum ho hum. Fuck that, because I'll kick your nan in the fucking pussy.
No.
Yeah, but it won't be funny then.
No.
When you see her getting toe punched in her crunchy old vagina, you're not going to be that happy. But then the argument is, well, because she's old, that's okay? Because she's a woman, it's okay for her to oppress other people? See, it's not funny when the same points of ridicule are reflected back at you. And that stimulates a lot of conversation about what aspects of hatred we normalize and what parts we don't normalize. Because you see, the way you behaved is the idea of me kicking a woman in her vagina is reprehensible, because society dictates that me kicking an old woman is not okay. And that's absolutely fine. But there was a point in time, Marvin, where men hitting women was not met with revulsion.
No.
Even though we both know violence towards women is not okay. But there was a time where it was. Like we're saying, doesn't matter if it happened back then, doesn't mean it was okay. And my argument is the same for racism. Just because your grandmother's old doesn't mean her racism was ever okay.
No.
So it's just a question of how you use that, really. But yeah, there's a lot of people that have discrimination, but that's because discrimination and racism and the embrace of racial hierarchy is a part of the British identity. That's why when you see black and brown people saying that they support anti-immigrant sentiment or and support anti-immigrant ideology in the form of like the Conservatives or Reform, they can't just be like a normal person and be like, I support. They've got to buy the Union Jack clothing, and they've got to have the Union Jack in their room, and they've got to have a Union Jack tie, because it's not enough to say that they identify as a British person. They've got to overcompensate.
Forgotten something there. I had an idea, but I've forgotten it now. But there was something that you said that clicked with me. But yeah, we don't like to take accountability for a lot of our own stuff as people a lot of the times.
British people especially don't like to take accountability for their stuff. But at the same time, you could argue that it's very hard for you to maintain an empire if you make people within the empire aware of the horrible imperialist shit that you do. So, using comedy to be like, well, we're ever so sorry and we're just very silly and we do very silly things is a much easier way of disseminating information to people rather than talking about exactly what they do. But then by the same token, it's a very good way of broaching the conversation of accountability without people becoming defensive. So that's one of the reasons why comedy is so important, is because then when you need to talk to people about the legacy of the British Empire or legacy of racism and the effects this has had on a global basis, then it can introduce that conversation without preying on people's insecurities and preying on their shame and preying on their anger and angst, and introduce the conversation in a much easier way than you would if you were having it in a form of a debate. And that's why comedy can be so important.
But it can help us deal, if we can make a joke about something, that painful experience or whatever's happened doesn't have as much power over it. And then we can go into the solution of maybe handling it and dealing with it.
Absolutely. Ridicule is a much, much, much more powerful tool than meeting aggression with aggression. If you can make everybody laugh at your oppressor rather than try to encourage them to do bloodshed, it can be so much more effective to make people laugh at that person. Because obviously a lot of time when people commit acts of oppression or aggression towards a vulnerable group, it's because they feel the power of that person, or they feel that person's been dehumanized enough they can get away with it. But if we provide the opportunity for people to have their human experience and to talk about that so we can find commonality with each other, and if we also are able to ridicule the idea of superiority of a group, then they're less likely to act a certain way. So it's one of the most powerful tools there is. I think that it's done much more. Comedy has probably done a lot more to legitimize the presence of minorities in the UK and in the US, for example, or in the West in general, than any politician ever could.
What is your thoughts on a lot of politicians now and their impact on society? Like, I know a lot of people, especially in comedy, they go through the easy narrative of like, Trump's an idiot, Trump's a racist, and then they don't have a debate with people. But if you try and debate with them, they get annoyed, and they don't. That's an easy narrative for a lot of stand-ups. You always hear the joke, "Oh, Trump's an idiot, Trump's done this, Trump's done that." But most of the time, I don't hear anything smart about talking about him or what's going on with politics in the UK or what's happening now. I mean, I honestly think, and this, you may say I'm silly for this, but I think for sure what's going to happen in the next 5 years is Reform will get in, they'll do terrible, and then the Conservatives will get back in. And I think there's no way in hell that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of validity into your predictions. I think that you might be being optimistic that there's going to be a political system left in 5 years.
Oh, well,
In terms of like the veneer of democracy is already beginning to disappear, and we're probably going to arrive at a point where it's like, how long do they need to keep up the pretense? Um, I feel that, as I said, uh, the death of capitalism and the continuation to push its reanimated corpse throughout the West is getting to the point, the apex point, and we're not going to be able to go any further. How we're living now and the fake ideas in which Western civilization is predicated on are finished. And this is something people don't want to necessarily accept, but we are at the point where civilization and the world as it exists in our part of the world have gone as far as they can go. I think that the idea of bipartisan politics died a long time ago. I think the idea of democracy has never existed because I'm a black person, so I have direct anecdotal evidence that doesn't exist in this country or in the West. And I think that as we have continued to cede power to a technological oligarchy, the idea of politics and representation on the basis of country no longer exists. And we are not a world of countries, we are a world of multinationals and global interests. And your politicians exist only as clerks on behalf of the oligarchs that control them. And again, that's the kind of wild shit that will not really get you on TV, comedian. So don't say what Dane says. But I think that there's a lot of validity to what you're saying. And so far as Trump, I think that there's a number of Trump for me is just another example of how Western ideology likes to alleviate itself of responsibility. You know, Trump, when people say Trump, he's just like Hitler or he's just like Hitler. Well, they're both the same in that their power is only based on the power people gave them.
Hmm.
I'm going to say this now. I think I could beat Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump in a fight anytime,
oh, I
at
agree.
any point. Knock them the fuck out. I guarantee you this. If I was to punch Donald Trump in the face on TV, white people would be more upset by that than they'd be upset by what he has done.
No.
If I was to beat Adolf Hitler on TV to a bloody pulp, people would be more upset about me being violent towards a racist demagogue than they would be about what he has done. Because people's, because the media has trained people to have much more of a fear of violence inflicted by a black man than they've been trained to fear the malevolence of a white man in a sharp suit. So, and I can prove that because I did a show on Channel 4 with Jimmy Carr. It was called Jimmy Carr Destroys Art. And Jimmy Carr would have various different pieces of art from different people. And he would have two guests to debate whether or not this art is valid enough to separate the actions of the artist from the art. And in my section, I was on with a producer and an activist called Jolyon Rubinstein. And we were having to debate about whether we should destroy one of Adolf Hitler's original paintings and throw it in a shredder. And I said, and we're assigned these roles, don't get me wrong. So this is not a reflection of Jolyon at all, because Jolyon is obviously a intelligent man of Jewish descent. So I said, fuck that. Adolf Hitler is not an artist. Drawing pictures alone does not make you an artist. And just because you drew a couple pictures, it does not mean that this negates from your actions or your mentality. So fuck Hitler and fuck his paintings. And Jolyon had to kind of play devil's advocate there. But ultimately, I was like, throw this shit in a chipper, burn it, and shit on the ashes. And there was a lot of people in the crowd that did not like to hear that. Because they do not consider his genocidal actions to be severe enough that his stuff should be destroyed. And I was like, well, there you go. So I think what you said is definitely valid. But I think a lot of that comes from the fact that there's a lot of people where historically comedy has been used to explain culture and to speak truthfully about the world and to speak truth to power, because there are a lot of people who would rather not rock the boat, are more concerned with their fame and their profile than using art to capture the zeitgeist of today. I think there's a very good chance that what you're saying could happen. But then you also have to take into account the fact that the people that you're speaking about, Reform and the Tories, are largely backed by a right-wing media entity within the UK, where as much as we try to portray ourselves as being this secular democracy, this is a right-wing country that has always historically been right-wing, that has believed in and propped up a right-wing monarchy of colonizers whose prescience is also predicated on the fact that they are white Europeans. So that society is going to reflect a lot of that. As much as we like to think that we're progressive or that we've progressed past that, one thing I notice about a lot of the white comedians in prominent positions is that everybody's an atheist and everyone says the idea of religion is stupid. But what do you think is the reason why the royal family sit on the top of the throne in this country? Because they believe that they are ordained by God. Protestants and the Reformation came from Henry VIII saying, I believe that I am a child of God and I can create my own church. And so you live in a country whereby this king decided we will believe a different version of Christianity because I am a descendant of God themselves. And the people in this country are raised and internalized the belief that because of their proximity to royal family and to whiteness, they are also closer to God. And yet, you never hear white comedians interrogating this idea. Because I've heard white comic after white comic be like, religion is so stupid. It's so dumb. Like, how can people still believe in religion? And I say to them, what's the first fucking word of your national anthem?
God save. Oh.
You don't have to go any further, Marvin. The first word is God. And yet, I've never heard a white comedian interrogate why that still is. Because they don't have to. Because it doesn't affect their lives. Because they don't have to work. Only up until this point now are white people having to question the validity of their reality. That you're supposed to be atheists. Oh, you hear almost every single white comic say that they're atheist. You not only that, you'll hear every single white comic has a joke about, or they might allude to the issue of immigration and grooming gangs. Catholic Church has been doing that shit for years. Jimmy Savile was cool with the royal family. Margaret Thatcher, who is responsible for the economic landscape of the UK as it exists today, where a lot of generations of my generation and preceding generations of comedians grew up in Thatcherism and saw the effects of that.
Okay.
And they still vote for it, and they'll still vote for it today. And they don't want to hear anything about it. Because we've just arrived at a point, I guess, or I feel like we've arrived at a point where, like I said, when you say, I think we're going to go, that's because the idea now is that everyone wants to go backwards. They think by bringing back reform, they're going to reintroduce like the Thatcherite individualism and the kind of like globalism and outsourcing. They want to go back to like the, high points of the 80s and the introduction of investment banking within the UK. And when the UK was the whole world's money launderette and the whole world's bank, we're not going back to that. And that is something that a lot of people are kind of struggling to understand. And so they've gone back to the same mentality of that time of the 80s and stuff, where it was like, get these foreigners out so that we can be, make Britain great again, basically.
And they're playing on people's fears.
Massively, yeah. And most fears particularly amongst Britain's largely white contingent of people, because it's a white country, is their economic fears. Because really, that's the only thing that separates them from the rest of the world. And they are scared of being like the rest of the world because they've seen through imperialism how they treat the rest of the world.
Well, yeah, you're in America. You're going to be in America soon, so you're probably not going to deal with it.
Will I? Will I?
I don't know.
Who
I don't know.
knows? Because they're
don't know.
tightening it up.
So,
I don't know where I'll be. I'm not like, this is not stuff I'm trying to say to be incendiary or anything like that. It's just my job title is observational comedian. So the first part of that is observational. So I'm just saying what I see. Now, I'm not trying to be alarmist or to attack or to critique people. People, as you said, they're trying to go backwards. The whole thing about reform and stuff and all the promises, Nigel Farage is somebody who was steeped in Thatcherism. He's a banker. He's from a banking class. All of his friends, they're not descended from the royal gentry. So they became part of nobility through the square mile. So they're of the banking class whereby beneath the royals and stuff, the people that operate within the square mile have as much power. But they want that power back. And they are indoctrinating British people into facilitating the deregulation that allows that to happen. And, I'm not the most politically astute person, but like I said, I can just go off what happened before because I was there before and I heard from people at the time, and I can see the same thing happening now. People are scared, but people do not want to address the cause of their fear. They just don't want to feel it anymore. And I guess I'm not that kind of person because I feel like lying to myself makes it much harder to do this job. So, yeah.
I've got a couple of questions to ask before we.
Yeah.
I know that you've got to go in a bit. So with everything's going on, with everything's happening in society now, and everything's going on, what life advice would you like to give comedians or people out there? And number two, we're going to mention it very quickly, very small, very tiny bit. When you had that incident a couple of years ago, what advice would you give to any comedians if in that position? And what advice? Yeah, I think we'll leave it on those two questions. And how do they find out about you?
Cool. Oh yeah. I mean, the first question. What would you say was the first question again?
What life advice?
I feel so senile. My life advice is, it's hard to give life. My life advice would be, maybe not to kind of lie to yourselves, I suppose. Like comedy, despite what people may have you believe is the case now, is about truth telling. I think that, I am not one of these people who believe that, comedians are the new philosophers and we are the bearers of the truth and we provide the guiding light that's going to usher humanity into its next phase of social, cultural evolution. Because I have met enough comedians to know that definitely isn't the case, including myself. But I would definitely say that very rarely in this life do people get the opportunity to talk and have people listen to them. So if you are somebody who is lucky enough to get a platform or stage where people are listening to you, it probably serves you in the long run to say something have something to say rather than just say something. There's a lot of comedians who you might even know now who are famous and they might seem to be very wealthy, and I'm sure in the short to medium term that looks very alluring and that's very attractive. But there's been many a famous person in human history, and you probably don't even know all of them because people get to be famous for their time and they pass on. Whereas the people that stood for something or the people that had a particular message, they tend to be remembered. And when people do remember them, they don't tend to remember how much money they had. Now, there are some people who may not have always had the nicest things to say, but fame and infamy are two fingers on the same hand. So normally if someone's been remembered for hatred, normally remembering them will only elicit more hatred. And I guess you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. But, we're in a art form where the idea is that we bring joy out in people, which is a very profound thing to be able to do. And it's a very special gift to have, to make people laugh, especially in the times that we're in now. So don't take that lightly, and to enjoy that. And while money is a difficult thing, it can come and go, and its relevance definitely changes over time, and I wouldn't place too much stock in it. And just, believe in yourself. If you've got something valid to say and you have a genuine intent to connect with people and make them laugh, then don't think about the scale at which you can do that. Just work about doing that in a way that works for you. Because, as I said, I like to think that I have a unique journey compared to a lot of my peers, because I didn't have parents that encouraged me to do stand up. I didn't have access to, I didn't go to the Brits or Italia Conti or any kind of stage school. I was not a part of a development plan since I was a child, like someone like Ricky Gervais. I didn't go to Italia Conti like someone like Russell Brand, where I was then snatched up from a drama school and then groomed into becoming a stand-up comedian. I didn't go to any kind of stage school. I've never had a writer to help me out with any of my work. I've had to kind of do it all myself with on-the-job training and understanding, and I've still been able to make a career for myself. So there's no reason why you can't do it either. And there is 8 billion people on the planet, and so statistically, there's got to be a group of people that are interested in your story. But laughter is universal, so everyone's interested in having a laugh. So you just got to find a way to make that work for people. And yeah, but that's all I can say really. And just know and understand and hone your voice, but just be honest with yourself, because you'll get a lot better at this a lot quicker. So yeah, honesty is the best policy, I'll say.
And when you had, we're going to keep very short because it could be all sorts of things going on here. But when you had that incident a while ago and people went for you and they came at you and they tried to destroy, if a comedian gets themselves in that position, what advice would you ask? Because I think people in life, we've all said or done things in the past that have got us in massive trouble. I've had a couple of situations a while ago where I had someone who was deliberately trying to poke the bear of me, and then what happened was you react and they say, you see, they're the problem. And then all that happened there was that they thought it was, they turned people against me, but all they did was take the trash out. But from your side, what would be your, if a comedian gets in that situation where they face what you had, people come for you, going for you because of something you said, because someone's baiting you, what would be your advice?
My advice would be to understand that if you weren't somebody that wasn't relevant or special, they wouldn't be talking about you like this. And the more you progress within your career, the more people there are going to be to talk about you. And you can't make everybody like you. And in fact, sometimes because of the better you are at your job, less people will like you because of that. So you have to accept that comes with the territory of being in the industry that we're in. That celebrity and fame are like fire. They can heat your food and warm your home, but they can also burn your house down. So you have to learn how to wield that in order to make it benefit you. I would definitely say, do not try to continue to give these things power, because in my instance, there are people that are still living parasitically off my mistake. People who, quite honest, have had no career and never been on a stage for 10 years. And now, because they are attached to me, will continue to milk that for the rest of their lives, because it's the most exciting thing that's ever happened to them in over a decade. There are some people, even in comedy, who have jumped on the back of that and are continuing to try and perpetuate stories about me. But the thing about time is that it's always a healer, whether people like it or not. And one of two things happen. The truth comes out, or the truth is revealed. And I'm a very confident person who knows who they are, because I've been doing it for such a long time, that the world ultimately will see who I am, and it will be in complete contradiction to any of the lies and rumors that have been spread about me. And, just to let you guys know, I'm somebody who, I've had, uh, UK lawyers for Israel who work on one of the biggest behalves of this colonial ethno state that's currently engaged in a genocide, working against me. I've had people like Ricky Gervais try to destroy my career. And on the one hand, I can look at that and like, that's a terrible thing that makes me very angry. But really, if I am just a black man from South London and a multimillionaire who has had, his career being groomed since he was a 14-year-old by enormous media, if that person is working that hard to destroy my career, it shows how afraid they are of me. If people have to pay other people to disseminate lies about me, or people have to create entirely new names for themselves and new emails and new identities just to affect my career, it just shows you how famous I am. Like, I have had the entirety of British media try to demonize me. And, I've had the entirety of, people within comedy try to have me in prison, despite the fact that I have never been detained, questioned, charged, interviewed with a violent crime, not only in my capacity as a comedian, but my entire life. And it's a very strange way to find out how influential and how famous you are, but that's where I am. But you get through these things, consistency will pay off in the end. And just protect your peace, man. Like, I'm somebody, as I said, I carry the same energy in a comedy club as I carry outside a comedy club, same one within the industry as I do outside of the industry. Because with me, and even though I experienced a lot of hate, Marvin, during that whole time, what I focus on is the support that I had. And I can tell anyone listening or watching this, all the top comedians and the most successful ones were all on my side. And they all reached out to check if I was okay. And they did that privately because they didn't do it for the press. They didn't do it for any kind of clout. They did that because they respect me as their peer, as an artist, and as a comic, and as a human being. And I choose to focus on that. So I think comedians especially, we are very much trained in a room full of laughter to focus in on the person that's not laughing. And I would say that you'll learn to deal with that a lot better with experience, as I've learned. So when in issues where you experience difficulty and people vilifying you and viscerally trying to drag you over coals and destroy your name and career, just remember they're doing that because you have something that they want or they want to take away, and you don't give people that power. And don't worry about the one person that's not laughing. Focus on how you continue to entertain and to impress the people that are laughing, because ultimately those are the ones buying tickets to your shows. When you're in a business, ultimately you want your business to be profitable. Focus on the people that are helping you turn a profit rather than these detractors who in many ways themselves also need you to survive. So remember that, because I've had many a critic that tried to talk about me as well. And I understand this. If they all were gone tomorrow, comedy will not change. If there's no more Chortle, no more British comedy guides, any of these guys you see in Edinburgh, if they were not to be around tomorrow, comedy is not changing. Whereas if there's no more comedians, they've got nothing to critique and their life is done. They need us. We don't need them. So that's how I feel. I will continue to do comedy irrespective of whether critics say it or not. Because the true critic is the person that is in front of me laughing or not laughing at the jokes. So I focus on that. So that would be my advice, is to understand that fame won't necessarily change you. It will just change how people act around you. Because I've always felt like I'm the same person, but I now understand that as a matter of fact, that because of how I'm perceived, you've got to learn how to work with that perception. Because how you see yourself is very different to how people see you, and especially when you have something that people want. So understand that and make sure you learn to do that responsibly for yourself, for the sake of your own peace, and for the people that actually care about you. And I'm the fucking best. And nothing is going to change that.
That's a good way to end it. That is the great way to end the podcast. Now, for anyone that's listening right now, that's a perfect way to end it. How do they find out about you?
You can Google me online, probably ignore some of the stories. They're not true, but you can find me on my YouTube channel, Dane Baptiste Comedy, and you can check out my content. I've got some stand-up specials there, as well as my sitcom, Sunny D, which will be available online as well. You can also find me on all your good social networks. You can also find me on Substack, where I can write about some social commentary that may not feature on stage. And also check out my podcast, Dane Baptiste Questions Everything, as well. No, it's called Dane Baptiste Questions Everything. That's available on Spotify. I have another podcast called Citizen Dane that will be coming up soon, so check that out as well. Okay. And just get in touch with me find out about some upcoming gigs. Add yourself to my mailing list on danebaptiste.co.uk. And keep supporting. Thank you very much. And thank you to you as well, Marvin.
Thanks for coming on. Guys, hope you've enjoyed it. And I'll see you guys at the next episode. I think the next episode we're probably going to talk to a sitcom and stand-up writer. And I'm going to try and get
That's
Susan
me too,
Nixon.
By the way. So that's also me. But yeah, Susie sounds great. And I'll be listening out for that myself. But thank you very much for having me.
Take care, guys.